Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, and once again it's time for our series, Jerry and Abigail, an intimate dialogue. Sometimes we can desire so desperately to be led by the Spirit within us that we miss the guidance being given to us from all around us. Perhaps you've had that experience. On this episode, Jerry and Abigail consider what it means to follow your inner call while understanding that God is also a significant character in your story. God is a player, a co-main character in every story there has ever been, including, of course, yours. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Well, hi, sweetheart. Thanks for joining me again for an intimate dialogue. And I'd like to start with something I said in the last For God to Jerry to You, the one run, I guess just the week before this will run. And what I spilled some water on a pad, and I looked to see I had to clean it up and save the pad, and I found I had some notes there, and the notes were from 2021. But anyway, so I was kind of rereading, what was going on then. So I shared those on that last recording of From God to Jerry. But there was this particular line that I thought was striking and worth our considering, sweetheart. The line was, you know what my message is, and you are perfectly capable of shaping it in various venues. Oh, this was in anticipation of writing Radically Personal. I hadn't written it yet, but I'm praying as I'm kind of getting ready to move into that project. And so God goes on, for this particular book, the emphasis is on trusting your own spiritual senses, is how I said it in the podcast, but looking at my bad handwriting again, I think it was trusting your own spiritual sensors. Well, they mean roughly the same. But,
Yes.
It's as if we have, and this is how it seems to me, and see if this resonates with you, sweetheart, that we have kind of spiritual antennae, in the kind of complex entities that we are, body, mind, and soul. Not as three separate strata or something, but as all combined in the one package of a person that you are and that I am. And we have these spiritual sensors, but of course, they're not as definite as vision and hearing and so forth, and yet we pick some things up. And the lesson here is that you have to trust them. And precisely because they're so elusive and undefinite and undemanding, usually, they just kind of come and go, and you've got to catch them, you might say. And you need to trust them in spite of their elusiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like your spiritual life. Does that make sense? You're living along, there's some sensors and...
Yeah. It's, there are people I know who should stop trusting their inner light and look at the traffic signs. Their self-trust is premature and based on deliberately espoused ignorance. They sort of think they can shortcut the road to the wisdom-inspired conclusions of the greatest minds of the age that the culture has received and stored and often correctly honored. So I certainly don't advocate bland, thin-layered, proudly ignorant self-trust. If you have an intuition and it's very marked, but it would seem to take you off the path that your expectations had formerly, on which your expectations had formerly placed you. I would check experienced people, preferably people who've known you, who don't run off, in hysterics at the first bizarre intuition that they might be receiving, who have a recognizable fund of common sense and feet planted on the ground, and that is the background. It's not that that's the foreground, that gives you the go ahead or the stop signal. It might be more likely to give you stop than go ahead. But if other things being equal, your common sense is in place, you haven't gone haywire, and you're not ignoring the counsels of experienced, well-wishing people in your life. If all those things are in place and the intuition you receive seems unadulterated, not secondhand, they're sort of, with these pauses put in place by inner guidance, strong intuition, what might, in the best case, be divine guidance, or some alliance between your higher intuitions and receptivity to divine guidance, or whatever wisdom can come through to you. If all that's in place, so far as can be known, then I think one has a certain responsibility to go forward, to be guided by these leadings, just as you have a responsibility not to run off heedlessly at the first, hedonistic invitation. Say, stop and place some more bets at this green table where a bunch of green-faced gamblers have bet the farm. If it's not an intuition of that kind, which I think is somewhat recognizable, you can sort of feel what the old silent films used to call your higher nature and your lower nature, and the difference between them. Well, good. Then listen to your higher nature.
Yeah, it's well, it's hard to tell what's your higher nature. That's one of the challenges of life, right, that you're describing, that you've got to sort that out. When, for me, hearing the God voice was one of these moments. Okay, I hear the God voice. You go look it up in the Manual of Psychiatric Disorders. You're crazy. It's schizophrenia, and that's been the analysis, a one-line analysis, ever since that manual was started in about 1840. And I thought, gee, that seems like an awfully brusque analysis. Is that going to apply to every case? Socrates heard a voice, schizophrenia, was he schizophrenic? So I thought that wasn't very helpful. But I then, in part under guidance, went and talked to about the wisest people I knew, following, I guess, roughly your advice, though you weren't giving it to me at the time. But I think of Leon Kass, who, when I told him, says, first of all, this is not weird. And really? Because I had a naturalistic worldview, seemed really weird to me. And he went on from there. And Michael Novak, Alistair McIntyre, McIntyre, when I sent him a thank you note not long ago before his death, because he had been kind to me on several occasions, he returned the thanks double to me for sharing that story with him, that had meant something to him in his spiritual journey. We share spiritual journeys, and that's why on the podcast we do What's Your Spiritual Story? I think we just are about to have one or just had one with Scott Langdon. That's our co-host, and those are so illuminating. And but anyway, there's this challenge of what to trust and finding out what is the higher intuition and what do you check it against. And you're saying, well, of course, we're philosophers. And so, well, if you read Plato and Aristotle and Spinoza and Hegel and so forth, you've got a lot of help.
Yes.
And I know early on I had a young man, I described the story of falling in love with you and how I'd communicated with you. And he was saying, oh, I want that to happen to me. And it turns out I came, in one of these his family has picked out his future wife and he doesn't love her. And I want someone I love. And anyway, I'm worried immediately, oh gosh, if he breaks it off with her, he's probably destroyed her life. What that would mean for a young woman in that culture. He was maybe from Pakistan or some place. And anyway, but I gave him the advice that's similar to what you said, sweetheart. Find the wisest people you know who actually know you. I can't give you advice. I don't know you and your situation and so forth. I just was saying be very careful here and think not just about you, but about her and other people as well. But find the wisest person you can find. And he came back, was very, very nice. Oh, you're the wisest person. Well, no, a wise person who actually knows you, not, just some random person in the world, in the globe, that you think might have, something going for him. But find someone who knows you and your situation and is close to it and can apply the relevant norms for that situation.
Yeah, the advice to give that is given to oneself or to anyone applying to one's self for a recommendation has that double component. I'm just reminded of the student, very bright young man who buttonholed me on the Brooklyn College campus to confide a life problematic that I would be a one person to take quite seriously. He was in love with a girl. She was from an Orthodox Hasidic family. He had no such training or proclivities. Should he just put that aside and conform to her requirements for a husband before he proposed marriage to her? Or should that not figure? Should he how to handle this? And I had, from several standpoints, I was a good person to ask. Unlike a number of colleagues I could have named, I take romantic love seriously to heart. If somebody tells me they are in love with this person, that couldn't be a more serious communication. I don't think that's any kind of a joke or frivolity or burst of madness. On the other hand, if love is real, so are features like the ones that seem to be obstacles to this young man. And I said, don't become Orthodox because you want to marry her, study orthodoxy in Judaism to see if, in truth, it's a life system you can believe in. Don't fake it. And if you do, then your suit, your desired proposal to marry this young woman will not be a conflicted one, will be a proposal that she can uh, assent to with the whole heart. And about a year later, I met him again. Oddly enough, the story, sounds like a made-up story because of its symmetrical features, its closure features, which a lot of life stories don't possess. He stopped me to thank me, told me that he'd spent the year studying the requirements of that are the gateway to becoming an Orthodox Jew, discovered that he could more than meet the emotional, psychological, philosophical, and spiritual ingredients, components that might have blocked the way. He liked it, it fitted him, and they were going to marry. So,
Amazing.
that's a case of real life and
doing
ideal,
he was doing the real
life
he was doing the real work.
Yeah.
That's
Doing
what he
the
was
real
doing.
work that's right, of real life.
Of real life. And that reminds me of, as I just mentioned, telling Leon Cass my experience. On that very occasion, he told me an experience of his own, an experience very much like the one you just reported in its perfect symmetry. He and his wife, Amy Cass, used to teach together. They had a wonderful marriage, and I think that tended to inspire students sometimes. Uh, and after a class, I think it was kind of great book style class reading Genesis. I don't know where they were in the book, but he always told them, let's read this as if it could be true. How about trying that? And anyway, a student came after the class and said, impress, I want to have what you have. You have a wonderful love in your life, and I'm going to go join the synagogue and find a wife. And Leon Cass told him, if you go to the synagogue looking for a wife, you'll probably get nothing. If you go there for a more appropriate reason, you might just find something.
It's the same story.
It's virtually the same, isn't it? You got to go. Yeah, there's no shortcut, that you can cut across this and bypass the requirements of life. And in this case, you're trying to use a spiritual vehicle, a religious vehicle, to find a wife. And wait, that's a kind of misuse of a religious vehicle. Well, the guy took that to heart, what Leon had told him. And a year later, Leon is in Jerusalem teaching the same text at about the same point in the text. And he goes back to his office after class. The phone rings. It's that very student. He went to the synagogue for the right reasons, found a wife. They're going to get married in June. It was just a remarkable story. But that can happen. But again, you can't just take the shortcut. You can't just leap. You've got to figure out, okay, what am I going to do here? I knew I got communication early, as I think even before God and Autobiography was published. We were putting excerpts and hearing from some people. And one guy told a spiritual story that was very interesting. It came upon him to help the poor, maybe right here in Philadelphia. I'm not sure about that part. And he was kind of figured out how to employ them in repairing old houses or something of that sort, a whole project. But it was kind of running aground because, oh, he couldn't pay them and so forth. And my advice to them is stop just following, oh, I feel I should go help the poor and build, figure it all out first. Figure out your finances. This is a serious problem. And talk to people to see if this is even feasible. Maybe you're launched off in something that isn't even a feasible project. So check that out too. There's no shortcuts in life. You can't just leap because, oh, I have an inspiration. Kierkegaard talks about the leap of faith or something. And well, no, too much leaping and you'll land the wrong place.
Yeah. Faith isn't unrealism. It's not to be contrasted with real life and preferred to real life. It's, the whole Hebrew Bible is about making faith feasible, making the world inhabitable for faith, giving faith a handhold and a foothold and a hoe to row, a row to hoe. Yeah, I've got that backward. Yeah, and so there's a double aspect to it. And Kierkegaard, who I suppose you might say with the best will in the world, but it's not for me to peer into his will and find out if it was the best he could do or the best in the world or worse than he could have done. But Kierkegaard gives the impression that there are stages in life's way along the path of life. You can be seductive. You can be ethical and get married. And you can be spiritual and take a leap of faith and throw away the ladders, and the world will call you ridiculous, as indeed I was told by somebody half Danish, is that what he is? That mothers won't name their children Søren in Copenhagen anymore because Kierkegaard had the poor judgment to get into a battle of wits with a newspaper editor who had, of course, the printing press and the cartoonists and, equipment to man the heavy guns of ridicule that Kierkegaard did not possess. And on the streets of Copenhagen, he lost the battle. He did not come out a winner. And his philosophy, you don't always win. You can wind up, as Plato describes the just man. His eyes have been gouged out by his enemies. His friends have deserted him. He's been beaten to a pulp. And nevertheless, Plato wants to say, his soul being intact, the just man is happier than the successful tyrant. And the whole of Plato's political treatise about political justice, translated under the title The Republic, is designed to show that despite appearances, the just man is happier. Okay, I think one has a responsibility to try not to be happy in the same sense as Plato's just man, if there's a way to avoid it. How about just being a little less happy, but getting through this life and continuing to be an influence and to do the right thing and pay whatever the reasonable costs are. You don't have to sell your soul in order to survive. That everybody's got a sort of a no point that you got to estimate for yourself. It's like putting your hand in very hot water. How much is too hot? You'll get your skin scalded. How much is still bearable? But realism and the spiritual path, the long and the short of it is realistic living and living spiritually should not be intuitively at loggerheads at war.
They're both part of the same task.
Yeah,
of living a life.
Yeah.
We're recording this just a few days after Valentine's Day, which was always a very meaningful day to us, and we went out to dinner, and we discussed our own leap of faith, you might say, or challenge. It's a challenge. What can you trust? What can you not trust? We fell in love. I fell in love with you on the phone, sight unseen, and I think you were maybe more slowly falling in love with me. I don't know, because eventually, to my great relief, you returned the love. And but I had not believed in romantic love. I was looking for compatibility and had a Myers-Briggs profile in mind, and that would have been fine. But no, this was not like that. This was not a compatibility dating chart thing. This was knock your socks off love. And I think for both of us, it was just, whoa. And you believed in romantic love. I didn't. So I read the relationship books, and they all were warning, warning, warning. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. It's a projection. In 6 months, it'll wear away. Well, 6 years, 26 years, it is not worn away. So I don't know what they're talking about. We know that can happen, infatuation, being swept up, and sometimes with disastrous outcomes for people involved. But in this case, we followed trust, as I did with the God voice. I talked to people, but I went with it. I think I followed your advice about realism, because in part by then this was going to cause me to really back off of my career and leave an income behind. But I check whether I can afford that. Do I have enough in effect to retire on and maintain roughly the same lifestyle? So I did due diligence in terms of, I'm not jumping off a cliff here, am I? No. And nothing horrible actually happened because of that sharp life change. I thought I was going to lose my friends, but no. People just thought, Jerry's had this experience I don't understand, or maybe it's a wonderful experience. They reacted in terms of their own lifestyle, but it's still Jerry, and they still like me, and so forth. So that was nice. But one of the things then that we talked about as we revisited that over a Valentine's Day dinner, I was impressed with you, because there was here you were a tenured professor lived with a rent control apartment on the Upper East Side, the best life imaginable, within walking distance of the museums that you had grown up with and loved. And with the love, you loved teaching, you loved the students of Brooklyn. And yet you never held back. And that was so striking. Neither of us wanted an affair. Neither of us wanted a commuting marriage, though that would have been the most, quote, realistic thing, and certainly could have been done. You changed to a Tuesday, Thursday teaching schedule, so we could have, minus the travel days, several days of every week together. But that really wouldn't be sharing a life. And we wanted to, and I was struck because I was running my own little organization and therefore had enormous freedom in what to do. But you, tenured professor, that, you're bound by the rules, and it's a position you can't just leave and step back into. Someone else snatches it up, they give your tenured position away. And yet, from the beginning, how could you? I'm kind of thinking in terms of the concept of trust, and I end up in radically personal, talking about the epistemics of trust. I think all knowledge starts with something you trust, even though you then criticize it and correct it as you go along. But you got to trust reason in order to reason about whether you should trust it here and there and in this respect and that respect. But anyway, how did you make that? How could you have that? I don't know if it was confidence. How would you describe it? Did you think, oh, this is just a leap of faith and that's fine? Or did you see, oh, well, realistically, this can work out, or what?
It'd be nice to give the method, the hodos, the path I followed, if I knew how to characterize that path. Like you, I went to all the wiseacres who headed social science and psych departments at Brooklyn College, all of whom told me that this is a very pleasurable delusion, which vaporizes within 6 months to a year, but kick up your heels, girl, enjoy it. I knew that was inaccurate. I had the example of my parents who had been truly in love. I also had biblical prototypes. I knew that all the key figures, the lead figures, the triumvirate of patriarchs in the book of Genesis, each had to find the right woman before going forward. I took that very seriously. The most romantic is Jacob's 7-year stint winning the right to marry Rachel and then being the wrong sister being slipped into the marital tent, and so on. There's a passion, a thread of human preference, passionate preference that is honored by each of the three scene-setting, tribe-defining fathers of what will become God's covenantal people. So I took that seriously. I don't know how you're supposed to take it, but I thought seriously makes sense to me. And I tended to look at grown-ups rather dispassionately in terms of their closeness to, congruence with, or distance from the life which actualizes its romantic ideal. I took people seriously as succeeding in life or failing by that standard, in addition to, Nobel Prize or full professorship or, lots of money was not that impressive, but I knew you could buy better shoes if you had lots of money. So, and better shoes speaks for itself. I like to look at rich people. I thought they can afford to beautify themselves, and it's lovely to look at them. But that was not the ideal for me. The romantic ideal remained serious and real. for me. And the criterion, the metric by which the crooked lines of relationships and personal development could be measured. What's wrong with this person? What's repressed? What's deviant? Well, look at the true metric, the romantic ideal, measure out from there.
Well, you sometimes talk about this as a matter of just sincerity, that people have desires. And these other things that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm extending things you've said to going for money and wonderful shoes. Well, you might love wonderful shoes. I'm sure every woman likes to dress well, right? Many people, men do, like to dress well, be right up. However, there's a tendency for a lot of these things, even the Nobel Prize, can be a substitute, a distraction, a deflection from what they really, really wanted, from the real desire.
Yeah. It's sincerity. You ought to have all of you at the ready for whatever life presents. And if you've been suppressing some lead desire, some more fundamental motive and purpose in order to espouse a motive and a purpose which is really plan B, then not all of you is there. For whatever life calls you to do, which could be self-sacrificial. It could be to stand up and be counted when no one else will. You need to be there with every cell in your body, your internal organs, your brains between your ears, your spine, whatever you've got to live with, it has to be on the same, it ought to be, it's prudent to get it to be on the same side as your conscious self. The ideal of plumbing your unconscious as if there are dark caverns and in back of those and underground crypts and pathways and it's all so interesting. No, the ideal isn't to be that interesting. It's to be at the ready. It's to be where life needs you to be.
Those psychologists think when they talk about the id and et cetera, all these subterranean elements of yourself, urges and moves and gravitational pulls and washes back and forth, they think that's the real you, not the you that's falling in love or saying, oh, good, I get to go teach a philosophy class again today. Or, isn't this book fascinating? But no, it's this other murky depths that are the real Abigail.
Yeah.
And it's kind of irritating in a way. They know you better than you know yourself because they've got, and sometimes it's they can make these pronouncements about Abigail without ever meeting Abigail because it's in their books, their theories.
They never meet Abigail, even if they're face to face with her. For me, the sincere life, the authentic, the genuine life, I lived up to the age of 10 when nobody thought I had murky depths. Everybody we were dueling with sticks. We were kids together. We ran races. We flopped around in the pool in this summer place my parents went to. And life was credible. You didn't have to say, but what are you really trying to tell me? What do you really mean? And usually that was a ploy, because what I supposedly really meant was what the guy had in view, and it had nothing to do with my support system or, self-protective hopes. It had to do with his urges. So what I really meant and what his urges really urged was hypothetically imagined to be identical when it was far from identical. It was creepy to even tell me that. It was the most unromantic and dumb and boring.
You're talking about the seducer, right? Who
Yeah, the
comes and says,
seducer.
"Oh,
And
underneath, this is what you really want. You
yeah,
want this too."
I know what you really want. Oh no,
Oh,
you
God.
don't, you ugly pug. You piggy wiggy. Go away. If I had only held on to my 10-year-old wisdom, my life would have been a heck of a lot more reasonable than it became. I have a permeable nature, so it's hard for me to live on 10-year-old instincts. I have to study philosophy and figure out what the arguments are and, you know, get back via the long way to what I once already knew.
Yeah. Now, another thing we talked about over Valentine's Day dinner, sweetheart, was after revisiting this kind of shock of falling in love and what is this all about? Radically readjustments in life. You ended up giving up your professorship. The city takes away your apartment because you're not living at it enough to qualify anymore.
Yeah.
And that whole life erased, just erased for this kind of leap, this
Yeah.
radical trust. Okay, and you don't even know, I suppose, what you're trusting. You're not exactly making predictions. Oh, if I live out this love, a year from now, life will be such and such. You don't know what life will be like a year from now. You just know the love is compelling. It
Yes,
has its own authority.
exactly.
And but part where we went through that, and it was a upheaval in different ways for each of us. For me, I just didn't believe in this kind of love, and what is this? I'm out of control. I felt kind of crazy. Uh,
Hmm.
but that was over 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
And of course, we survived that period.
Hmm.
We changed whatever concepts we needed to change. We kept saying somehow it was overwhelming our emotional capacities. We slowly expanded those in a way to accommodate all of this to the point that now we just are in love. We just live our love
Yeah.
daily. And it's not the frothy waves at the top of the ocean, it's the more calm underneath level. It's
Yeah.
now the life, it's now the grounding of our life.
Hmm.
And and therefore also we talked a little bit about of our life going forward. It's the platform not just of us today, that okay, we live together, we love each other. Each decision is made in light of that love. So without thinking about it any more than one thinks about gravity when you stand
Hmm.
upright and so forth, you're taking account of gravity. We're always taking account of our love, whether or not it's self-consciously being processed for by
Yeah.
us. And it's the basis of life going forward.
Hmm.
And in that mode of the work you're doing, the work I'm doing. And what struck me is, although we each have our own projects, there are some, intellectual couples or two authors. Will Durant and his wife Ariel wrote things, they had one project they shared. No, you're doing your thing. You've got your weekly column and you do stuff with me. I've got my thing, God and Autobiography, Theology Without Walls. But
Hmm.
increasingly, I edit things you write, you edit things I write. We talk about the same topic, and increasingly our separate projects are being kind of woven together. so that they're a kind of larger, coherent whole, increasing cross-reference between, say, the God podcast in your column and so on.
Yeah. It's, as you speak, I'm thinking one of the edited alterations in my own work after we married had to do with some kind of subtle, hard to categorize change in worldview. I had two manuscripts, two books, A Good Look at Evil, my philosophical book, and after we married, I brought out at your supportive urging and with your encouraging help, a second edition of A Good Look at Evil, and it had two new chapters, and they were backed by my newly confident sense that God was a player in people's personal story. I'd had the view argued for in the earlier edition that we each have life stories, and since the title is A Good Look at Evil, that an evil person has often can be perceived to have a good grasp of what story the targeted victim is trying to live, and can do the malefactor's best to, and that prompts the malefactor to do his or her best to undermine the story or to undermine the victim's belief in her story, or to kick away instruments and props that would facilitate living out the story. And in a way, the evidence for my view was how wicked agents behave. If there's a wicked person who has you in her sights, she will be doing that. And you can identify a wicked person by the felt menace to your life story. In the last two chapters, part 4 of A Good Look at Evil, there's one other player who makes the whole situation of the agent intelligible, and that's God. And it's not that I was agnostic or atheistic in the prior parts 1, 2, and 3 of A Good Look at Evil, but I didn't have a sense of the presence, a sense that, no, you can partner with God. This is a player with a capital P.
That new chapter is entitled God and the Care for Your Story.
Yeah.
So God, you can have God, you live your story with God as a player, as one of the lead characters, you might say, in your own story, and helping in that interaction point the way for your story.
Yes. And that's like these characters in Genesis.
Yeah.
You can hardly understand why Abraham believes that he should exit from Ur, where he has everything set up and can live a good life, and why Jacob should labor 7 years for a pretty girl. They all live as if it's what they call beshert, as if there's a divine destiny that plays into and intertwines with their realistic action. They don't lie down and, let the divine destiny float them to the goal. On the contrary, they're very busy, very practical, often have to feel obliged to combat enemies or trick them or sidestep them. So the life each one lives has not gotten less realistic. They're all living real life, but God is a player too. So that was one change in my work that happened in consequence of our marital interthreaded lives. So, and it would have seemed to me I'm giving up my professional life, my accomplishments. I'm a liberated woman. Well, I'm nuts. What am I doing? But no, it got thicker and it got deeper. And then the other thing was Confessions of a Young Philosopher, the memoir, if you want to call it that, but it's really a story of my younger days, understood as a pilgrimage story in the manner that male confessions, like the famous one by Augustine or Rousseau or whatever, are understood. A person lives at the frontier of his journey through his days, and all the risks he takes, all the hopes he entertains, all the quest that he never lets go of are a spiritual map of what you go through in what a member of his generation or his position in culture would go through if he had only the highest ambitions for himself, to know what is best for a human being to live in my time. So I began to understand what was earlier a memoir as a confession in that classic sense of the term, retitled the book, rewrote opening chapters and the closing chapter, and reissued it as a better version of its original self, because now, although the main body of the book, especially the dialogue, went unchanged, I knew warum, I knew wherefore all this was transpiring as I couldn't have known before. So we're talking about major life work beneficially affected by our marriage, our joining of our two lives. It wasn't that I threw over the educated capacities I had developed, but that I was able to promote them and exercise them on a higher level.
Yeah, one reader of your Confessions of a Young Philosopher,
Yeah.
one reader says it's the challenge of you're trying to live your ideal story.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a real question for each. This might be a good point to end on, something to leave listeners to think about. What is your story? What story are you living?
Mm-hmm.
Just look at your life as a story, which you might not have done before, and where it's come, where it's come from, where it is now, where it seems to be trending. What is it heading toward?
Yes.
And then there's the question, what is your ideal story? What story would you like to be living? Would you feel, oh, I'd live a better life if I lived this way? And maybe the two can come together. How your actual story and your ideal story can come together.
Yeah, that's wonderfully well said and helpful, I think, to me and to any viewers.
Good. Well, thank you once again, sweetheart. And we'll continue this conversation in about a month. We'll have another intimate dialogue.
Good. It's an adventure.
It's an adventure.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.